Hey human, my name is Tom Jacobs. I'm on the web at tdjacobs.com and also healingsuicide.com. And whatever, I'm an astrologer. I do stuff. I'm a channel. Sometimes I like to think about asteroids and other minor archetypes. And sometimes I specialize in them. I've done a lot of work on Chiron and Lucifer and the true black moon Lilith, as well as the asteroid Lilith. Anyway, one thing that I'm thinking about a lot these days is Eris. And so I'm doing a video here to offer you some ideas. What are Eris people like? So Eris, the name means strife and discord. And so on the face of it, she presents strife and brings discord. I like to think of this as catalyzation into growth. I have kind of this whole long teaching about it, and there are a couple things that you might dig if you're into wanting more than I just do this intro thing here. And one is Living Myth 2 Sacred Psychology book, and another one is the Eris Webinar. It's called Lighting Fires, which I teach periodically. You can check out my site under the Learn Astrology live classes area. So Eris people bring the energy of change. It's different than Uranian change. And what they do is they push people's buttons. That's what Eris people are like. Eris people also light fires under people. And those are the two categories that I use to work with people to help them through the process of living Eris stories. By default, I can push somebody's buttons probably unintentionally, but also if I wanted to intentionally. But then also I can learn to take that and turn that into lighting fires under them. And the difference is with pushing buttons, I've used this recently in classes. I could go out and read somebody's body language in public and make an assumption about, what he's insecure about and say, what your problem is? That's Eris. But also, if I were to read his body language and have an idea of what his insecurities are, I could help him through those things. I could help. You're better than what makes you feel vulnerable or small. And wrapped up for me in Eris stuff, Eris teachings is that vulnerability isn't weakness. So what happens is Eris people push people's buttons, and the people have their buttons pushed. A raw nerve is exposed. Then they either feel 2 inches tall or defensive. Like can either feel humbled. Oh, wow. Yeah, look at that thing. I feel really insecure about that. Or defensive. What do you mean? You don't do that to me. So a lot of Eris stuff in our relationships and behaviors is unconscious because we might feel defensive because we don't know how to deal with our vulnerabilities and insecurities. So Eris people push people's buttons, and Eris people can also learn how to light fires under people to help people overcome the perceived limitations that they carry. So when you think about it in a chart, it's both where somebody has an insecurity about living a certain way or behaving in a certain way, but also where if that person does it, other people's insecurities will be triggered. So one kind of example is somebody with Eris in the 4th house of, let's say, self-care, right? It's about home and family, dealing with your emotions and needs. And let's say that person has a work and career family schedule that's kind of hectic, and that person says, wow, I need to take 2 weeks off. Maybe it's hard for that person to confront needs, right? Maybe that person has an insecurity about validating her own needs. As soon as she says, I have to take 2 weeks off, if someone else perceives he doesn't have the space or right to do the same, he might be triggered and say, oh, well, I wish I had the luxury of blah, 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 blah. So sometimes defensiveness and conflict can arise. She's pushing his button unintentionally because she is validating her need to take some time off and go within to that 4th house and whatever, recharge, rest, do whatever she needs to do. Same way Eris in the 5th house. I might be insecure about expressing my opinion. I don't have it in my 5th house, but obviously I'm fine with expressing my opinion. But if I'm insecure about that and then I overcome that and I actually do it, if somebody else feels unheard or invalidated, or that feels her opinion isn't valued, but here I am acting like my opinion has value, I might accidentally push her button. So she might, want to talk over me or wonder why she feels scrambled or conflicted to try to get the last word or to be righter than I seem to be or something, right? So in normal Eris dynamics, until we learn a lot about vulnerability and mature spiritually and as humans and psychologically and emotionally, we sometimes go back and forth and feel triggered by each other in that way. So Eris people push people's buttons and again can learn how to light fires under people. Like let's say with the fifth house example, I'm validating for myself that I got to say this thing because I'm validating my own opinion. I'm expressing it because, healthy fifth house expression involves, among other things, not saying something to get a response from people or to feel validated by others, but it seems like a contribution that has value. I want to share something. I want to offer something in case it works, or I want to tell a joke because I want you to feel warmth and I want you to laugh and be happy. Right? That's a healthy fifth house expression, right? The unhealthy one is if you don't laugh at my joke, I'm going to be really upset and hold it against you later. I'm telling a joke, but you better laugh. So anyway, fifth house healthy version. Oh, I'm just offering this, well, let's say somebody else is scrambled and says, I have a joke, and kind of inserting, right, her own opinion or something. And we might say at first, oh gosh, that person just seems to need attention. Or someone might say, well, she's always like that. She's kind of a narcissist or something like that. Well, let's avoid the labels. Let's not shame that person for having this button pushed or for having this insecurity about her own validation or validation of her own expression or opinion or creativity or whatever, her personality, fifth house. Let's not shame it, but, I can give her space too. Meaning if she is defensive toward me or makes me wrong for taking up space or making noise, I don't have to make her wrong for making me wrong. That's mature Eris. So that's just kind of like a little bit of an overview. I want to say Eris was first cited in 2003 by our friends, the astronomers. And then validated by the International Astronomical Union, the IAU, in 2005, and given what was it, XB313, that alphanumeric designator, and then in 2006 was given the name by the astronomers, by the IAU, Eris. As of this recording, it's 2022. That's only, oh my gosh, is it 16 years? It's 16 years. That's only 16 years. That's not a lot of time in astrology. So this perspective on Eris that you're hearing from me might be unique among all the ones you're hearing, right? So and one of my things about new bodies, even 16, 20 years later, is that a bunch of different voices are needed to come up with different avenues and ideas so we can try to figure out what it means for us. So my thing happens to be, my bias is toward individual evolution of consciousness and psychological growth and emotional healing. So I have this whole archetypal process of Eris laid out that includes what I'm talking about. But you might hear vastly different things from other people about Eris. I would encourage you to take them all in and see what feels true. But you might hear wildly different ideas about Eris over the last some years and the next few years. Some people will focus on it as a collective issue. Some people will talk about in terms of the collective dynamics. And I look at it that way too, maybe in a little unique way, but all these perspectives can be very valuable. So I want to go into that for a moment because all the Eris stuff that I do is about the personal process, at least in terms of readings and webinars and stuff like that. Since late 1926, Eris has been in Aries full time. So what is that? 96. 95 and a half years. So if you're under in age 95 and a half years, you have Eris and Aries. Previously, bits of, I think, 1922, 23, 24, 25, of course, getting longer and longer until it gets to 1925. Anyway, proportions of time dips into Aries and then regresses to Pisces. but if you're under 95 and a half years old, you have it in Aries. So to our astrological minds, that might seem to say it's not important as an individual influence. So some of you might be familiar with my work as an evolutionary astrologer, and you know that evolutionary or EA people do focus on Pluto, which is quite slow moving, right, with its 248-year orbit around the sun, and how we look at different layers of consciousness, right, to get into the unconscious of a person and describe Plutonian issues there. Well, Eris is, I believe, about a 558-year orbit. It's highly elliptical like Pluto, but it's way beyond Pluto orbiting the sun. So again, it may seem like it's not relevant personally, but when I teach the Lighting Fires webinars, light bulbs go off for people, and it's quite significant personally. We just haven't adapted to this vocabulary word. But anyway, your astrological mind might say, well, if it's going to be in a sign for over 100 years, we can't take that seriously as an individual influence. But when you really understand pushing buttons and lighting fires, and really understand that defensive response to feeling a raw nerve exposed, you'll see it in your life. Yeah. I also relate this to some global events as far as, now I'm going to lose all the words. Oh, diplomacy, statecraft, and even terrorism. I have teachings on that's part of a work in progress, teaching on those things. But essentially, I might puff myself up as an individual so you don't see that I'm vulnerable, because I may perceive vulnerability as weakness. Well, nation states can do that too. As far as the terrorism stuff goes, it's like finding that weak spot and exploiting it. Sorry, I'm losing all the words today. Like small group of people can have a major effect on a culture or community or a city or a nation, by finding that button and pushing it, exploiting a weakness, right? Just like if I were to go to the store and look for somebody and say, hey, expletive, you know what your problem is? I could start a conflict that way. So anyway, yeah, so the Eris bit, I perceive it is important personally, even if everyone under 95 and a half years old has it in Aries. So it might be tempting to think of the house placement, therefore, as important, but not the sign. But I want you to understand, Eris and Aries, we're all dealing with this button pushing experience from both sides, button pushing and fire lighting experience, lighting fires under each other experience of through a lens of defensiveness or quick reaction without thinking. So Eris in any sign would be about being triggered, but in Aries, it has that extra layer of reacting without thinking as its natural mode. And, Aries planets can sometimes find themselves with a foot in their mouth, like foot and mouth disease kind of thing, right? I always think of a soap opera example where somebody doesn't mean to hurt somebody else, but when the second person is hurt, they throw a dagger back. And then that first person is caught off guard and hurt and maybe does it again. Like, I always think of this example of like imagine a soap opera where an adult child comes home and says, Mom, my fiance doesn't want to get married at your house. And the mom is really hurt. And she says something like, sorry, bear with me. Well, you remember when your cat died? She didn't die. Like, I took her away from you and gave her to somebody else because I was mad at you. Something like that, right? Escalates a conflict. And then the kid is like, oh, right? And then, oh, do you remember when I was 14 and I said I lied to you, right? And then the mom goes, I'm not even your real mom and I don't love you. Kind of like weird escalations of people responding to each other after being triggered, responding from pain with barbs and daggers and trying to hurt somebody else. There's a scorpionic plutonian thing in there too, but this reactivity of the raw nerve exposed is really where we want to look at. And I realize I'm kind of doing the video out of order, but you know, if you're chill people, you'll roll with me. The whole story of Eris, which I talk about again in Living Myth 2 Sacred Psychology, and also 2 or 3 of the other archetypes in this story. But the story of Eris is she's not invited to this big deal wedding where everyone else is invited. She's marginalized. She's not invited because she brings strife or discord. She's the only deity on Mount Olympus who's not invited. So we hear she's, you know, we hear she's angry. And so one of the keys to Eris is learning how pain leads to anger. So that sense of, your cat didn't die, I took her away from you because I was mad at you. Whatever, it's stupid story. That sense of, I'm trying to hurt you. That's what we see in Eris people sometimes. But we have to grow up and look at pain as being behind anger. So check out the Lighting Fires Eris webinars. I do them, I don't know, every few months, sometimes with 5 people. I think the next one coming up starts, it's in early April 2022. But if you see this video after that, just check my website, Learn Astrology page, live courses. There's a link at the top and it'll zoom you down to it. And because it's the future on the web over here. But anyway, and also Living Myth 2 Sacred Psychology has a chapter on Eris, but then how her story leads to the trial of Paris, the judgment of Paris, or the trial of Paris, which leads to the Trojan War. Anyway, all these things kind of like follow. And also there's a chapter in there, not on an asteroid. Oh, by the way, the Living Myth books are not about astrology. They're about myth and archetype for psychological and emotional understanding and healing. But anyway, there's also a chapter in there on Iphigenia, whose story comes in kind of later, but is involved in that whole story too. So anyway, thanks for your time and energy. I hope this has been somehow useful to you, and thinking about Eris with a few more keywords you might have been exposed to, and also not assuming it's bad. It's a part of our archetypal processes, part of our psyche, part of our spirits, part of how we're going to live our lives. So why don't we learn how to do it intentionally in positive ways? So find me on the web at tdjacobs.com and take care of yourself.